Okay, welcome back. This is the second half of the for loops and sequences screencast. So we're still in this for loop sequences Python file over here. All right, so as I alluded to in the last screencast, we're going to be looking at this new type of sequence called a tuple, right? And this is an immutable sequence. So it's like a string or a range in that way, but this can contain any type of element, can a tuple. Right, so some examples. You can wrap your head around what that means. You might have a tuple that contains an integer followed by a single character string, followed by a float, followed by another string, followed by multi-character string, and so on and so forth. Right, so it can contain any of these values that we've seen so far. It can contain booleans. Any of the values we've seen it can store. And as a reminder, when we say it's immutable, it means that once this is created, once you create a tuple, you cannot change it. Cannot be changed. Right. So as we'll see, that doesn't mean you can't work with it, right? Because you'll still be able to access these values, and you could store them in a new tuple. There's various things you can do with tuples, but they're not quite as easy to work with as the data structure we'll look at later on this unit called a list, because a list is mutable and you will be able to change the list, right? But you can kind of think of it like strings, because strings are also immutable technically, but you can still assemble new strings and you can still store those and work with those. So, all right. So I just use this term data structure. You know what that means at this point. So this is just a way storing, organizing multiple pieces of information or data in a program. Right? Example of one is a tuple. Not storing and organizing multiple pieces of information in a program. All right. So let's look at what this looks like in code. So if you want to initialize an empty tuple, the way you would do that would be to use the parentheses. So in general, if things are surrounded by parentheses, that might indicate that they're a tuple. Right? So if you've got a tuple of boy names, for example, John, capitalize them all. So Bob, Alex. Right? You're going to have a series of values, comma separated. Right? In this case, they're all strings, but they don't have to be. And then they're going to be surrounded by parentheses. So boys tuple, and then we're going to have a girls tuple for our examples here. So we're going to say Jill, Stacy, Sarah, Gwendolyn, Alex. All right, so those are examples we're going to use here. And when you print a tuple, it's going to print in like tuple format. Okay, so if I print boys and I print girls, and then I run the code, all of our above stuff is going to run. And then our tuples print out, and they look like, right, the tuples as they're stored in code, right, in our source code file. Right? So which is nice, because if you ever want to see what's stored in a tuple, you can just print it out. All right, so printing one at a time. So if you want to access these names in either of these lists, you can use a for loop to do that. So you could access every boy in the boys tuple, and you could print out each boy. I'll put a space in between each name as it prints. So in our output here, all of our boys are now printed one at a time on the same line. All right, finding one to print. All right, so this is just like an example of a simple search algorithm. We're going to find one person to print. So if we have a tuple of girls, we could look at every girl in the girls tuple, and we could check and search for a certain girl. So if the girl that we find in the tuple is named Sarah, then maybe we want to print out that girl's name. And maybe we also want to say something like, and is when girl characters long. All right, so let's run this code, check it out. Okay, so we got our end equals causing some line continuation here, but Sarah is our girl, and her name is 5 characters long. I should say that, and her name is 5 characters long. All right. All right, so here's a little challenge for you to try. So see if you can search both tuples, all right, and find names that are in both. Right. So if you look at our tuples, you'll see Alex is in both. Right. So see if you can write an algorithm, no matter what the name would be, to find it in both tuples. All right. So pause the screencast, then come back for a solution. All right. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways you could have done this. Okay. So first way I'll show you is you have to look at each boy and each girl, right? So that's part of the problem here is you got to look to see if they're in both. So you have to evaluate each one. So you have to have at least one for loop to look through the boys tuple. You could start out with the girls tuple also if you wanted. All right, but then once you see a boy, then you could check using the in operator if the boy is in girls tuple. Right? And if the boy is in the girls tuple, then that boy is in both tuples, right? So in this case, you could print out that fact. So you could say that boy is in both tuples. Okay, let's see that work. Right, so in this case, prints out for us that Alex is in both tuples. Right. Now, this is leveraging the in operator. So you had to kind of uncover the fact that you could use that here. But another way, if you're going to be looking in multiple data structures for information, is to use what's called a nested loop. So you could look at for every boy in boys tuple. Then you could look at every girl in girls tuple. Right? And if boy and the girl match, right, then you know that you found a duplicate. Right? In this case, boy and girl are going to be the same value. So you can print out either one here. All right. So how does this work? Well, you're going to look at every boy in boys. So think about that. Right. This boy's tuple, if you want to visualize this, you can copy and paste it down below. Looks like that. In our girl's tuple, like that. So for every boy in boys, we're going to look at every girl. That's basically what it's saying. So it's going to first look at Jim. So our outer for loop, we would call this first loop. We'd say, when boy is Jim, I'm going to do all of this stuff here, right? So when boy is Jim, I'm going to look at Jill, Stacy, Sarah, Gwendolyn, and Alex. So I'm going to loop through all the girls and check if any of those girls match my boy Jim, right? And then after that loop ends, that for loop's all the way done. If it doesn't find anything, like in this case it didn't, our outer for loop will move on to the next value, right? And then John will be our boy. We'll loop through all of our girls and see if John is in the girls tuple, right? So we'll look at all of our inner for loop for girl and girls will run, right? And so on and so forth. And then on the last iteration of our outer loop, boy is Alex, right? And then that boy Alex is compared to every girl right here in the girls tuple. And when we get to that very last girl is Alex, our boy is currently Alex, and that's where we'll end up printing this found a duplicate message here. Okay, so let's see this run. So you can see this runs and it does find a duplicate. That is Alex. Okay, so we're not going to do much with nested loops this unit. All right, but this will become much, much more important as we go into our final project for the year, right? Okay, so tuple function, the last topic for today. It's a new function that will convert any sequence to type tuple. All right, so let's see an example. So if you have a range as one example of a sequence, like 1 to 10, actually if I go to 11, and you wanted to convert that to a tuple, you could use the tuple function to do so. Right. Likewise, you can do it with strings. So you could convert a string to a tuple. Right. And then after doing so, just to visualize this and see the tuples, we'll print them out. So we've got printed tuples, just print numbers and letters. And you can see that both of those sequences, the range of 10 is parsed out into this tuple. And the same thing for the string, right? Every character in the string gets its own element in this tuple, right? And then we print them out. Okay, so there's an introduction to tuples. We'll use those some this unit, but like I said, a different sequence called a list is going to be even more useful than tuples. So we'll quickly move on to covering lists, which will basically supplant tuples for a lot of different types of things we'll want to do.